So, welcome back to the Peace, Health, and Joy podcast. I am your host, Diana Wallace, and I am super excited to jump into this next topic with you. I mentioned it in the last episode, and seriously, if I could be known for one thing in all the world ever, like one day when I have grandchildren, if there were one word that they would think of when they think of me, I hope it has to do with forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. And honestly, until I learned it, I didn't know it. I didn't know what a big deal forgiveness would become in my life. So let me give you a little backstory. In 2009, my husband, that we have been married about 20 years at this point, he had been, well, let me tell you his backstory. He had been a bull rider. So when he and I got married in 1989, I married a honky tonkin' bull rider. Okay. How fun is that, right? And then my bull rider, 5 years later, felt called into ministry. And then we went to seminary. He went to seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. And then the next thing you know, we're church planters. We started 3 different churches in Northwest Arkansas over the next 22 years together. And he was really just a tremendously wonderful human. He was a real cowboy. He had grown up on cattle ranches in Arkansas. He had been a bull rider. He had such a heart for the rodeo community. Our daughter went on to become a barrel racer, and we participated in family play days. Our churches hosted play days, and and she rodeoed. It was just a fun, really fun season. But I guess once a bull rider, always a bull rider. And so when he was about 45 years old, his not old, but his former bull riding running buddy, Eric Moix, called him and said, "Hey, Tim, I'm hosting an old man bull riding. Will you come?" All right. So here's the thing I now know about bull riders. They want to make sure that their last ride that they cover their bull. That means they actually stay on for all 8 seconds. Well, Tim had not covered the last few bulls that he had been on. And let me tell you why it even matters, like what I'm getting ready to say to you. A couple years before Tim and I met, so this was before I knew him. We met when I was in college, and he was in college too. But a couple years before we met, he had been at a rodeo in Russellville, Arkansas, which actually is where we met when we were in college. And he was at a rodeo, and he was riding bull riding, but he was in the slack, which means they have the whole rodeo, and then the rodeo's over. And then there are still bull riders that are going to ride. They call that the slack. They're going to come and ride after the event. And so he was in the slack. Well, usually after the actual rodeo's over, like the ambulance leaves, it's like the show's over, nothing to see here. And that's kind of typical. And so he was in the slack, and he had drawn a bull called Red Pepper. And he got on his bull, and the bull did what bulls do. Like, they knew this bull's going to come out of the chute, and he's going to be trashy, which means he's going to jump this way, and he's going to jump that way, and then he's going to spin. And they knew that Red Pepper was a spinner. And so, like, it's interesting. Like, us people who aren't bull riders, we don't know all these things about bulls, but bull riders know about the bulls. They know what's going to happen. Like, literally, the bull will come out of the chute. He will go to the left. He will go to the right. He will get trashy, which is kind of like both of them, and then he'll spin. So Red Pepper did just everything like they said he would, and he started spinning. So cool thing about Red Pepper, he wasn't a very big bull. Cool thing about Tim Wallace, he was 6 feet 2 inches tall. Now, Have you ever heard that bumblebees can't fly, but nobody told them, so they still do it anyway? I'll just tell you, I don't know a whole lot about rodeo, but I know that 6'2" guys don't usually ride bulls, especially little bulls. But Tim didn't know it, so he did it anyway. And so he was on Red Pepper doing the bull things, got into his spin, and Tim made the mistake of looking down into the well. That's the thing when the bull starts spinning, that's the thing in the middle. Where our eyes go is where we go. What we focus on is where we go. If we focus down, we're going down. When we look up, we go up, okay? We may or may not come back to that, but it's important to know that those principles apply in bull riding as well. The bull started spinning. Tim was looking down in the well. His hand that was like rosined and wrapped around the bull and wrapped all tied up in there and all that good stuff, his hand got hung up on the bull. And even when he let go, because of how things were, his hand was stuck on the back of the bull and his body was off of the bull. So now the bull is bucking and Tim is just being, flopped around, all 6'2" of him, being flopped around all over the place until finally he came off the bull and he hit the rodeo ground, like the rodeo arena ground. Boom. And that was good. And the clowns, the rodeo clowns, which are not just there to be funny, they're actually there to help the rodeo participants. The clowns were trying to get the bull like distracted and get him away from Tim because Tim had been hung up for a while and needed to be able to have a moment to get up and scurry off the arena floor. But before he could, the bull stepped on his chest and crushed his sternum. You don't have to be a medical doctor to know that that is not a good situation. But what you might also not know is if this is the sternum in your chest, it's right there, just right there in the middle of your chest, right behind it is a very important blood vessel called your aorta. It's very, very important. If something happens to the aorta, that's not good for the rest of you. When the bull stepped on Tim's chest and fractured his sternum, it was not good. It was not good. I can tell this story because I heard him tell this story countless times in our 30 years together. Even though I wasn't there, I will always feel emotion about this because this was so powerful. So his sternum was crushed. He could not breathe. The clowns got the bull out of the arena, and praise Jesus, the EMTs were there, and there was this new technology that they had just gotten, that they had just been trained on, and it was blood pressure pants that they could put on his legs to push all the blood from his legs up into his chest in hopes that they would get enough blood to his heart to keep him alive until they could take other appropriate measures. They called for a helicopter. They knew it wasn't good. Tim was laying on the arena floor, and he would tell the story that he knew it wasn't good. He could hear people talking, and he was laying there with his eyes open, and then all of a sudden, it just got dark. But he knew it wasn't dark. He just couldn't see anymore. And he knew, he believed he was getting ready to die. And he said, one of the last things he could say was, "Tell my mom and dad that I love them." And then he didn't have to close his eyes. He just kind of knew that he was getting ready to die and that he would face Jesus. And in that moment, he wasn't sure for a split second. And then a peace washed over him. And he remembered that when he was 9 years old, he had asked Jesus to come into his heart and to save him and to forgive him from the sins that he'd already committed in his 9-year-old life. And I'm telling you, I heard he was quite a little pistol when he was a kid, okay? I bless the Lord, he got all that out of his system before I met him, because I married the sweetest, kindest, most gentle human. But he had been quite a little biscuit earlier in his life. But in that moment, believing that he was dying, that was the last thing he would ever say, he said he felt a peace just wash over him. And he knew, if I die, I will be with in the presence of the Lord, and I will be okay forever. Forever. So there he is on an arena floor. Couldn't see anymore. Then he couldn't really hear very much. They airlifted him to a hospital in Little Rock, and he spent a couple weeks in the hospital. Both of his lungs collapsed. They had to put chest tubes in his lungs, and it was quite a journey for him to recover. But about 6 months later, he decided he wanted to ride a bull again. So he knew that his sternum, like the doctors told him, dude, your sternum has been crushed. Like, you are forever vulnerable. If anything ever hits you in the chest again, it could kill you immediately. Okay. So he's like, well, I want to ride a bull, but I don't want it to crush my sternum. So what can I put over my sternum to make sure I'm safe and healthy? Okay. Let me just say, what I'm getting ready to say to you is just a little snapshot into the creative man that I would meet 2 years later and marry, and we would get to enjoy 30 years together. He decided to strap a Christmas tree stand over his sternum. He had his buddy wrap him up with duct tape so he could go ride a bull. Okay. I don't know if he covered that bull or not. 2 years later, I met this wonderful cowboy at a Waffle House. That is a story for another day. And fast forward, the man is 45 years old, hadn't ridden a bull in, gosh, honestly, it'd probably only been about 5 or 6 years, but he had not ridden a bull in a while. And we did not have health insurance. And I did not think it was a good idea for him to ride a bull. Now, at that point, we've been married 20 years. I literally cannot think of a time I had ever asked him to not do something. I knew if he wants to do something, he is going to do the thing. And I will stay out of his way, and I will pray. Okay. That might be a word for someone right there. Okay. Just stay out of his way and pray. And so I really felt in my spirit really uneasy about him riding this bull. So I was like, Tim, I'm just going to ask you. I've never asked you to not do something. I'm asking you to not ride the bull. And he said, you know what? I probably won't ride. I know I probably shouldn't ride a bull. I'm 45 years old. I probably shouldn't do that, but I want to go to the event. I want to hang out with the other bull riders. So I'm like, of course, always he would hang out behind the chutes. That was completely fine. So we went. We drove 3 hours to the event, and he was back behind the chutes with all the bull riders and his old buddies that he used to run around with. And our daughter Bailey and I were sitting in the place with all the other spectators, and we were watching. And man, one guy came out and he got hung up. I think he broke his ankle. And another guy came out and he kind of got hung up, and he like did something terrible to his knee. And then the next guy came out and he rode meaning he stayed on all 8 seconds. And everybody was just hooping and hollering. This was like an event. And imagine our surprise when out of the farthest chute down there, chute number 6, on bull number whatever, Tim Wallace, and they threw open the gate, and here he came, and he was bucking. The bull was bucking. Tim was in his like bull rider position, and he was all that in a bag of chips, and he was having his best day. And I was mad. I'd never actually been mad at him before. Now, literally, we've been married 20 years. You're thinking, girl, you had to have gotten mad at him. I'm telling you, the man was like he was just a very dear human. He truly was. He really was. And I'd never been like hot mad at him. And I was furious with him. He covered the bull. He literally was like Best day ever. Best day ever. I still got it. I'm 45. I covered a bull, all this stuff. And his wife would not want to talk to him anymore for the rest of the day, all the way home for 3 hours in the car or the next day. She didn't want to talk to him anymore. She didn't want to be his friend anymore. I did not want to be his friend anymore. I was so mad. To me, it felt like he had, well, he just didn't care. To me, in the moment, it felt like he did not care about Bailey and me, and that he just wanted to do what he wanted to do at any expense. And I did not like that. That did not feel good to me. To him, he still had it. He was all that. He was cool. He was strong. He was timeless, all this kind of stuff. To me, selfish man. To him, what's her problem? I still got it. Can you kind of see? There was like there was no communication, except he knew I was not happy and I knew that he was very happy, which made me more unhappy. Okay. I would love to tell you that, in real life that I was like, oh, I just want to be holy here. And, I'm not going to let the sun set on my anger. But I'd never had anger like this before. And that sun sure enough set that night, the next night, and for many nights. Time passed and I was just so mad at him. 6 weeks later, when I'm still mad at him because he hadn't apologized, and I was kind of waiting for an apology by about this time, I had gotten super entitled. And honestly, it was ugly on me. It was ugly to be this entitled, to be this offended, to be this everything. And so he and Bailey and I had come into town because we lived out in the country. We come into town, we'd gone out to lunch, and we were talking, like we did talk, but there was a wall. And we were at this restaurant, like super healthy food, like no MSG, it was like a real healthy place. And we got our plates and we sat down, and all of a sudden it felt like this hot, like a shop heater. It felt like a shop heater was shooting down my back, and it was so much heat. And then suddenly I felt like I could not breathe and I could not swallow. And I was then going to, of course, freak out because I could not breathe. I could not swallow. I didn't know what was going to happen. It felt like it was shock. And so I stepped outside to get some fresh air, and I did this technique that I know that helps your airways stay open, and did that. And I was doing different things and just praying that maybe I wouldn't die from eating something from a salad bar. But anyway, I knew then this is my body giving me some feedback about something going on in my soul. So our soul is our mind, will, and emotions. We are a spirit, like we have the Holy Spirit in us. We have a soul and we live in our body. And our soul affects our body, and our body affects our soul. It goes both ways, okay? And so I knew that my soul was injured, wounded by offense, by feeling entitled to an apology, by feeling like all the different ugly, bad, terrible feelings that I was having. And so I thought, you know what? This is getting serious. My body is giving me feedback. I'm going to have to do something different. So I sought wise counsel from a woman that is very trusted, and I've known her many, many years. I explained the situation to her, and I said, I just don't know what to do. I feel like I had anaphylactic shock today, and I don't know want that to happen again. I don't know what caused that. It is stressful. And she's like, well, I know you've been really mad at Tim for a long time. I was like, oh, I have been very mad at Tim for 6 weeks. It's been 6 weeks. And she's like, you need to go ahead and forgive him. And I was like, no, ma'am. He is the one who rode the bull. I don't need to forgive. I don't need to forgive. I don't need to ask him to forgive me. I need him to ask for my forgiveness. Like, he needs to apologize. And she's like, no, ma'am, you need to go to him and ask him to forgive you. And I thought, I don't think she heard me. And so when wise counsel gives you wise counsel and you don't like it, what do? You go get other wise counsel. So I called a friend in another state and I explained the situation to her. And I just said, this happened today. We were at this restaurant and I'm kind of ruffled about it. It actually completely freaks me out. And she's like, Diana, what unconfessed sin do you have in your life? And I was like, well, you have gone to meddling. Like, no, ma'am. No, ma'am. This cannot be about that. And she's like, I think it's about that, sister. You are going to need to go to him and apologize and ask him to forgive you. And again, I was just like, I don't think you hurt me. He rode the bull. Like, I asked him not to ride the bull. He said he probably wouldn't ride the bull. He rode the bull. And she's like, ask him to forgive you. And I did know. I totally had like some material. Like, I had been really mad at him for a long time. So, and it was ugly. Like, I can kind of smile and laugh about it, but I'm telling you, it was the worst 6 weeks of our marriage. So that night, we got our daughter all tucked in, and I swallowed every bit of my pride. I had a big extra slice of humble pie, figuratively. And I went to him and I said, Tim Wallace, I have been really awful, and I am not proud of myself, and I'm embarrassed, and I have been wrong. And I just want you, will you forgive me? Like, that ain't right. How I've been acting is not right. Will you forgive me? And he said, oh, honey, of course I'll forgive you. He goes, but will you forgive me? And I was like, what? Why did you not say that already? Like, why did you wait till this moment? And he said, no, I know you have been really upset. He goes, I know I hurt you. He goes, but I don't know. We just got to this point. And I'm like, yeah, we're at this point. It's like, will you forgive me? I was like, oh my gosh, of course I'll forgive you. And all was well. And I'm serious. Like, I think there were some tears. It was like the most pivotal moment in our marriage ever. I had to get humble. I had to get rid of my pride. I had to get over being entitled to an apology and go to him. And then there he was. He was ready to ask me the same. And it was just a beautiful thing. We were like BFFs again, and we were like married people again. And it was wonderful and all the good things, okay? And that was my introduction to the healing power of forgiveness. But wait, there's more. So that was like a year before I actually really started exploring and learning and experiencing what forgiveness can really, really, really do. That night, that season, it restored our marriage. In the years to come, it restored, it redeemed stuff in me from a pretty rough past. It restored things in Tim. It restored things in our family. Like, God is all about redemption. To me, redemption looks like this. When we lived in Missouri, which is where we lived for 6 years before my husband, Tim, passed away. But when we lived in Missouri, we lived way, way, way out in the country, and we had a fire pit. Now, I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, but I have more redneck. Okay, I know we've got this going on here, but I'm talking about the redneck kind, okay? I have more redneck in me than I might look like. So we had this fire pit. And in this fire pit, we would, burn firewood, and we would, gather around and have evenings around the fire pit that way. But we also burned other stuff. We burned boxes. We burned, gosh, I think a chair, whatever we needed to burn, we burned that. Okay. And so over time, what would happen is the ash would just build up in that fire pit, and we would have to clean out the ash. But one day I was praying, I was having my quiet time, I was just listening to the Lord, and he gave me this picture in my mind of what redemption looks like. And my eyes went to the fire pit, which was full of ash. And my eyes went to the fire pit, and there it sat full of ash. And what is ash? Ash is just burned up stuff, stuff that you used to have, maybe even stuff you wish you still had. It's just burned up stuff. Maybe it's burned up dreams. Maybe it's burned up happy memories. It's just burned up stuff. And so here's this fire pit, and I see in my mind's eye, like a big hand, like God's hand, and he just reaches down into that fire pit, into those ashes, and he just feels around. And then he finds something so beautiful, and he says, "Hey, looky here what I found. Something really beautiful from the ashes of everything. Things you hoped for, things you wanted, things you dreamed of, things you thought were gone forever. But look at this beauty from the ashes." And that's redemption. Well, it turns out that forgiving other people and redemption can be related. And so through a series of events, I attended a ministry school here in Alaska in November of 2010. It's called the Wellspring School of Ministries. The Wellspring Ministries still going strong. I absolutely am only forever grateful for Art Matthias, who founded the ministry, and for the way that they are still going and for what they sowed into my life. It fell into fertile soil. And that's a big part of why I'm here today. So I went to this Wellspring School of Ministry to learn how to help my clients get some breakthroughs from possibly emotional, spiritual stuff that was holding back their bodies. And what do you suppose happened? Oh my goodness. I mean, that's a whole nother story. I feel like we're getting a little long here today, but it's a whole nother story about how I even got to come to the School of Ministry in the first place, how God provided a way for Tim and Bailey to come up on that same trip, and for all of us to experience Alaska for the first time together. And Bailey and I fell in love with it, and Tim was cold. He just wanted to get home to Arkansas and get away from the cold up here. And so during the course of that 2-week ministry school, God delivered me from, oh my goodness, a long list of food sensitivities. At that point, I had not been able to eat sugar. I had I had no glucose tolerance. I could not tolerate sugar for 19 years. I had not eaten any sugar. And I'm not just talking sweet stuff. I'm talking barbecue sauce, ketchup, mayonnaise, anything that might have sugar in it. I could not tolerate it for 19 years. I was delivered from that. I had not been able to tolerate gluten of any sort, not just wheat, but all gluten for 4 years. Like, I had my own toaster. Tim had his toaster. I had my jar of peanut butter. He had his jar of peanut butter, because cross-contamination was a huge issue for me. God healed me from that. I was a control freak, and I was a perfectionist. And it took a couple weeks before I realized that I was those things, but I wasn't those things anymore. I'm not a control freak. I'm not a perfectionist. I'm still pretty interested in excellence, but life's too short for perfectionism. Like, only Jesus ever was perfect. And then everything else is going to fall short. That's okay. That used to would have freaked me out. It's like, okay, I can live with that now. But I also had this other really long list of food sensitivities, weird stuff like artichokes and blueberries and stuff like that I could not tolerate. And as a result of going through this ministry school, I was literally delivered from all of that. So I came home. We all came home to Arkansas, and I started sharing that information, which led to transformation. And I just haven't stopped. There was a little season. We'll talk about this in a few weeks. There was a season where the enemy almost talked me out of it. And I'm so glad he didn't. Because if he did, I wouldn't be here sharing this with you today. And so it's my hope that something that has been shared here today has encouraged you, has lifted your spirit. Maybe a story about a bull ride, maybe a story about, man, at least your marriage never had a moment like that. Maybe a story about the beauty of redemption. God really can pull something beautiful out of the hardest, baddest, ugliest, awfulest something. He does it all the time. And honestly, he's the only one who can. He is the only one who can. And I believe he always wants to. I believe he's always in a really good mood and that he is for you. And he has gifted us with the gift of being able to forgive others, to forgive ourselves. And gosh, I'm not even sure how long we've been going, but I'm going to take a minute and talk about what forgiveness is not. What forgiveness is not before I get more into how forgiveness can be a gift that you give yourself. So, a lot of times when I sit down and visit with someone about forgiveness, whether it's in person or virtual, at this point, my whole practice, every kind of work that I do is virtual. I have online programs for groups, I have online programs for individuals. And so when we start talking about forgiveness, often it's just like I can feel like if someone were sitting in a car and I was on the outside of the car and they had like tinted windows. Sometimes when I talk about forgiveness, I can just feel like that window is just going raised up. It's like, I don't want to talk to you. Let's not talk about that. But forgiveness is such a powerful gift we can give ourselves, and it can truly set us free from things that have hurt for a really long time, from things that have held us back in ways that we had no idea that our bitterness, our hurt, the pain that we feel from the thing, even if it's completely merited, like it's completely fair and reasonable that we're in pain because that thing that happened was so awful and bad and ugly and terrible. But when we are willing to forgive and to release like the debt that we think someone owes us, like how I thought Tim owed me an apology, when we're willing to release that, that is where healing can happen. And by healing, I'm talking about emotional healing, mental healing, physical healing. It's powerful. But what forgiveness is not? Forgiveness does not make the thing that happened okay. Okay? So like forgiveness, I'm going to use the bull riding example here, okay? Forgiveness just did not make it okay that Tim did something he said he wasn't going to do. Like that does not change that, okay? So it doesn't make it okay what happened. It doesn't change the consequences. If something bad had happened to him, even if I forgave him, we would still be living with those consequences afterward, okay? So it doesn't make what the person did okay. It doesn't erase the consequences. It doesn't mean that you suddenly have to be in relationship with that person. When I was growing up, when I was a really young girl, there was an adult male authority figure in my life who was abusive to me. Now, when I started learning about forgiveness and the things that he did had a very, very long-term impact on me. It was ugly and it left a mark for a really long time. I'd like to say less than 30 years, but no, it was like 42 years, okay? Long-term impact. When I forgave that person, when I talk about bull riding, we're going to talk about this person, okay? Talk about this situation, the situations. It didn't make what he did right. It didn't erase the consequences because I forgave him. It didn't erase the consequences immediately of what had happened. It did not mean that he and I were going to be in relationship anymore. In fact, we were never in relationship again once I learned like how to process what had happened. But it doesn't mean what they did was right. It doesn't mean that they are like off the hook. It doesn't mean that there are no consequences. Doesn't mean you're in relationship with them. Does not mean you have to spend holidays with them, invite them to your wedding or whatever. It means you're letting them go. You are releasing them. And when you release them, God does something in your heart that changes you. I've heard it said that hanging on to bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. You drink the poison and you're waiting for something bad to happen to them. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. With forgiveness, we release. We release them. We cancel their debt to us, their debt for an apology, their debt for trying to make things right, their debt of anything. We release them and cancel their debt to us so that we can be free. So we can be free. It is powerful. It changes. When we ask the Holy Spirit to minister to us through this kind of forgiveness healing process, it changes us and it changes our perspective about how things were, about why that person would do something like that. It often gives us compassion. When I work with clients one-on-one going through this process, and I work with a group of clients through something called the Peace, Health, and Joy Incubator, which is a 12-month online holistic transformation, massive life makeover experience. And we spend a lot of time on forgiveness, forgiving other people and forgiving ourselves. And in fact, that's where I'm going to wrap up for today. Next time, we're going to talk about what if the person you need to forgive is you? What if it's you? What if it's not them? If it's them, it's them. If it's you, you can't stay away from you, can you? No, you're stuck with you. You cannot hide from you. You cannot put on a helmet and protect yourself from you. You and you are you. And so next time we get together, we're going to talk about what do you do when you're the one you need to forgive? How do you do that? Oh my goodness. Do I have material on this one? But for right now, what I want to leave you with is this, and I talk about this more in the book called Healthy Body, 12 Principles for Peace, Health, and Crazy Joy. In the book, I really outline a very specific and proven process that you can go through to forgive other people and even forgive yourself. And I just invite you to, when you're ready, press into that process. It's something we'll be talking more about here on the podcast. But for now, I want to say thank you. Thank you for spending time with me today. I so hope this has been an encouragement to you. If you have found value, will you do a couple things for me? Will you share the podcast with someone? Do you know someone whose husband's a bull rider? Maybe you don't, but there's probably someone you could share it with that would encourage them. Do you subscribe to podcasts ever? I mean, if you do, I'd love it if you'd consider subscribing to this one. It's going to continue to be full of stories and encouragement for you, for people that you know and care about. And if you download like these early episodes, it actually helps us be able to share this podcast with more people. So I would appreciate if you wanted to download it, if you want to subscribe, if you want to share with somebody. So thank you again for being with me. I will have a link for the book in the show notes below, and I will look forward to being with you next time.